So, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever, whenever you're joining us, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, the sixth of the Maritime Security Challenges Conferences virtual sessions. My name is Brett Whittoft, and I have the great fortune and pleasure to lead the geopolitical analysis section on the west coast of the Royal Canadian Navy's West Coast formation in beautiful Victoria. We are bringing to you today another fantastic webinar with an amazing above and beyond speaker and just a fantastic, wonderful moderator. So thank you very much for joining us all this afternoon. Of course, I need to give thanks and acknowledgement to all the good people and organizations who helped make this possible. So thank you very much to our sponsors in Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, the Canadian Defense Review, Esquimalt, and Vanguard Magazine. And special thanks as well to the Navy League of Canada and the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. So this afternoon, I have the great honor of introducing the base commander here in Victoria, none other than Captain Navy Sam Sater. Captain Sater enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1996 and graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada in 2000. His first sail came aboard HMCS Vancouver, where he completed logistical training from 2000 to 2003. But his most cherished sea time came from 2005 to 7 as the head of the logistics department in HMCS Ottawa, while he deployed on the Operation Altair Task Force in the Arabian Sea, including time serving as the forward logistics site team and being seconded to the naval boarding team. Captain Sater's second operational tour from 2012 to 2014 was as the logistics officer for Maritime Operations Group 4, which enabled Royal Canadian Navy deployments in the Caribbean Sea and for the Rim of the Pacific exercise, which enabled HMCS Victoria, the submarine here on the West Coast, in her first operational deployment. Ashore, Captain Sater is a graduate of the Joint Command and Staff Program and has earned a Master of Defense Studies at the Canadian Forces College in Toronto, and he served as the section head within the Directorate of Naval Logistics at National Defense Headquarters. In 2017, he was appointed as Commanding Officer of Base Logistics at CFE Esquimalt here, and in June 2019, he was promoted to his current rank as commander of this entire base. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, sir, and the bridge is yours, as it were.
Hey, great. Thank you, Brett. So thank you for the introduction and this warm welcome. It is absolutely my distinct pleasure to be moderating this webinar on a topic that could certainly transform future naval operations. But first, I would like to extend our condolences and respect for the tragic loss of our shipmates from the Indonesian Navy who were lost during the tragic incident. It is a stark reminder of the perils of service at sea. Our thoughts are with their families and the Indonesian people. So during this global pandemic, we have witnessed a rapid acceleration for the use of new technologies. We're also generating, processing, and consuming more data than ever before. And yet, decision makers across naval services are often feeling data rich, but information poor. In this context, the importance of artificial intelligence, or AI, cannot be overstated. However, AI is still a very much misunderstood term, covering a wide range of capabilities, from narrow AI to general AI. Narrow AI, such as assisting weapons, aiming, and firing, is already operationalized to a large extent, but AI still holds a great promise to be much more integrated into naval operations in order to improve range, speed, and effectiveness of decision making. This also raises major questions of when and how humans should be involved in the decision making of AI, especially when it comes to lethal decisions. Our guest speaker today is an informed authority on this topic. And so I am honored to introduce Captain U.S. Navy retired George Galdorisi, Director of Strategic Assessments and Technical Futures at the U.S. Navy's Command and Control Center of Excellence in San Diego, California. Prior to his current post, he completed a 30-year career as a naval aviator, including 14 years as executive officer, commanding officer, chief of staff, and including 2 shipboard commands and aviation commands. His latest operational assignment as a chief of staff of Cruiser Destroyer Group 3, embarked in the USS Carl Vinson and USS Abraham Lincoln on deployments in the Western Pacific and Arabian Gulf. Mr. Galdorisi has written 10 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Act of Valor, and The Kissing Sailor, in which he has proven the identity of the 2 principals known in the World War II famous photograph by Alfred Eisenstadt. He has also published more than 300 articles in professional journals and newspapers, including MIT Management, Harvard International Review, Wall Street Journal, the Naval Institute Proceedings, the Naval War College Review, a Joint Forces Quarterly. Mr. Galdorisi is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and holds a master's degree in oceanography from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School and a master's degree in international relations from the University of San Diego. Before I turn it over to George, I just want to provide a quick reminder to the audience that there will not be any AI-generated questions during this webinar, and so therefore your active participation is highly encouraged. Please use the chat function to enter your questions prior to the Q&A period. George, over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you especially for teeing up this this topic so well. And as you indicated, it is something of great importance to all of our navies. I wanted to thank first of all Brett and his team for setting this up. I feel fairly strongly it's more challenging to set up a virtual conference than an in-person one, but he's done a fantastic job with this series. I've listened in on all of them, and I appreciate the opportunity to share our views. So had several goals today. First is obviously to stop talking before you stop listening. And the second one may sound counterintuitive, but it's to leave you mildly dissatisfied. And I say that because in 30 minutes, I can only surf the wave tops of this subject, but I have provided Brett and his team with a paper, which they said they're happy to share with all of you listening in. And the third goal is really to challenge all of you to, as Captain Sater said, to give this subject a great deal of attention, because it will impact our militaries for many years to come. And when I say we, doing this with my partner, Dr. Sam Tangretti at the Naval War College. We're very passionate about this subject. And again, I'll touch on that as we go. You see the title of the talk here. Another way to phrase it might be ships, planes, tanks, algorithm. What will we need to prevail in the coming conflict? And I think you'll see that as we go through this. If we all were sitting in the same room, I'd show this picture and ask if anyone knew who this gentleman was. His name is Simon Sinek, and the reason he's famous is he had this famous book, Start With Why. And I think this is the point where I also say that these views are mine and Sam's and don't represent those of our organizations, the U.S. Navy or the United States writ large. But I will say we are coming at this from a U.S. Navy perspective. So those are the examples we'll be using. But I think those examples extrapolate to your services as well. We wanted to put up this quote from General Shanahan because he's the first director of our Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. And he also reminded us of why we're doing what we do, those of us who work in industry, in the acquisition world, and in the R&D world. And I think it's a good way to kind of tee it up. And really what I'm hoping to do in this brief is to help all of you who may deal with this subject to think out of the box. So you can't hear from someone in a military organization without a bit of an outline. So this is the way we'll ripple through this. And as Brett suggested, we'll finish in enough time to have some Q&A at the background. As Captain Sater mentioned, I spent 30 years on active duty as an operator. I've been working for Navig Pacific now for 2 decades, and I'm coming at this strictly as a technologist, or primarily as a technologist. And in his best-selling book, Max Boot, I had a quote from British General J.F.C. Fuller, who said this. Now, I don't think any of us subscribe or are all in on what General Fuller says, but the point is that technology will determine the outcome of future warfare, and that's why it needs to be something we're focused on. So just very briefly, strategic perspective, again, from the US perspective, we realize the United States can't win, even the United States and its allies can't win just by showing up. And very briefly, for this informed audience, I know I don't have to go into great detail, but 6 years ago, the US strategic paradigm changed dramatically, where we now have 4 contingencies and 1 condition, the 2 high-end threats, the 2 lower-end but more unstable threats. But if you look at how we position ourselves from a technological standpoint, this comes from our just released National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and it couldn't be more straightforward or frankly, more blunt. And again, this is embodied in our defense strategy, our national defense strategy that talks about the 2 peer competitors, both of whom are all in on AI. And we could talk more about that in the Q&A. So you say, well, that's pretty dire. What is the US DoD doing about this? And from our perspective, first of all, we think this is a more contested world, and the chances of conflict are much higher in the years ahead. But we have something called the third offset strategy. I'll go through this very quickly. But if you say third, it begs the question, what were the first 2? In the 1950s, the New Look strategy dealt with the crisis in the European theater, where the Warsaw Pact had 350 divisions that would come crashing through the Fulda Gap. Going forward to the 70s, when our adversaries caught up with nuclear weapons, we had the third offset strategy, which was all about precision and ISR and those sorts of web-enabled things. And in the 2010s, we had something now called the Defense Innovation Initiative. Now, there are 5 pillars to this. And again, you can't hear from a military person without a Greek architecture. But 6 years out from initiating this third offset strategy, the last 4 of these aren't talked about that much, but the first one, technology, sure is. And when you peel the onion on this, you get to something called human-machine teaming. Again, I'll go through this very quickly, but it includes things like autonomous deep learning systems. Here is the game of Go, which of course, you know, AlphaGo defeated the human players. This is a cockpit of a Joint Strike Fighter. The US Army is doing some classic work in exoskeletons. We have the Triton UAV and the P-8 aircraft and the H-60 aircraft and the Fire Scout operating together with that human machine teaming. More about the Triton later. And then we have network enabled weapons like the Tomahawk, which we could talk more about later. So then the question becomes, how do we leverage big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning in our platform systems, sensors, and weapons? If you wonder whether the US is all in on this, this is part of the Senate confirmation hearing testimony of our Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dr. Kathleen Hicks, and she certainly puts a stake in the ground as far as where AI and autonomy are for our military. But when you say human-machine teaming, sometimes it begs the question, and we don't know really what that means. So here's a graphic I borrowed from our Office of Naval Research, which shows the human brain on the left, and obviously some networks, electronic networks on the right. Some of you may be aware of our National Security Commission on AI, but this is, again, their stark reminder of how important it is to not just our military, but I think to all militaries. Captain Sater mentioned the Alfred Eisenstadt picture from World War II. Here's another famous picture from World War II. This is General Eisenhower speaking with the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division on June 5th, 1944, the day before they were to parachute into Normandy. The reason he's doing this is Air Marshal Lee Mallory told Eisenhower that there would be 80% casualties, the 101st. So I'm using this picture as a way to segue to this picture and suggest that people who are all in on artificial intelligence and military systems This is their view of the future. General Eisenhower sending robots into war, and that way we don't lose any of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines. Those who worry about AI and AI taking over, this is their view of the future, of the robot commander talking to the soldiers. And again, most of us recognize this is an untenable situation. So the Goldilocks solution, the one right in the middle, not too hot, not too cold, is General Eisenhower speaking with the soldiers and with their robot partners. And again, that is the essence of human-machine teaming, and going back to that example of the P-8 and the Triton, or the H-60 and the Fire Scout. I think that kind of encapsulates it. So all of us in the military who deal in this area really need to be mindful of the fact that the public has been stress inoculated to worry about killer robots. In fact, many of you are probably familiar with the UN initiative to ban killer robots. And the reason the public is concerned about this is for over a half century, going back to 1968 and maybe before, the public has been fed a steady diet of concerns about killer robots. And remember, Hal wasn't a bad robot. Hal was a good robot who turned rogue. So whether we're talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey, the movie Her, where a man basically has an affair with his voice on his iPhone, to a very disturbing movie, Ex Machina, where a man tries to give a Turing test to a cyborg, and she co-opts him into helping her escape, and he dies in the end. So this is what the public has been fed, but not just in movies. In some very widely read periodicals, such as The Economist, these kind of concerns have been surfaced about autonomous machines making life or death decisions without a human agency. Again, not just The Economist, but in the US, our newspaper of record, the New York Times, made the point that when people are concerned that our commander-in-chief is making decisions to kill a suspected enemy, it could be a machine that's making that decision. And again, something that's untenable. Well, it's easy to say those are sort of the wonky sort of periodicals that discuss these kinds of things, but the people in the tech industry, the people making these algorithms don't have these kind of concerns about AI. Well, unfortunately they do. And you see some quotes here from very well-known tech icons, and they are voicing concerns that AI left unbridled could be something that could literally end humanity. So these are the concerns that those of us in the DoD must address when we're dealing with these systems. So I wanted to use one operational use case. I mentioned the Triton earlier, and this is why I'm picking this. Our initial director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence, General Shanahan, listed several missions that AI could be useful for. And one he picked that I'm going to use is the one that's the most operational: intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And for that mission, we've used manned platforms in the past. Now we have unmanned platforms such as the Triton, which, for anyone not familiar with it, is the maritime version of the Global Hawk. But before I get into that, I wanted to tip the hat to Admiral Scott Swift, former commander U.S. Pacific Fleet, who's spoken at previous maritime security conferences. And this is what he said most recently about bringing a shiny widget. And I tee this up primarily for folks in industry, that what Admiral Swift says when he's asked people to describe his operational environment, they can't do it. And his exact words were, they're slack jaws. So this is the commander's operational environment. This is represents or shows 3 U.S. carrier strike groups off the coast of Korea in 2017, when North Korea was doing threatening things. And I come from Niwik Pacific, and we're geeks. We worry about technological things. So we are the Navy C4ISR lab. And for those of you not familiar with the acronym, it stands for Command, Control, Communications, Computers, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. So I put this up there not to wave the flag for the lab, but just to basically show that a commander like Admiral Swift, or going back to Admiral Nelson, worries about 3 things primarily. He or she wants to know what's ahead of the strike group. That's the ISR in C4ISR. Then that information must be communicated back to the flagship. And then on the flagship, the commander must make a decision. and computers undergird all of this. So I tee this up to explain how an unmanned vehicle like Triton is going to help the commander. So in that ISR mission, this is what the Triton does. Well, the way the United States operates the Triton today is the unmanned aircraft are flown out of Guam. Someone sits in a windowless room in Jacksonville, Florida, and steers the Triton with a joystick. It takes the Triton 15 hours to fly from San Francisco to Tokyo. And during that mission, the operator sitting in that windowless room basically looks at empty ocean. Not very satisfying and not very useful. Using AI and machine learning that exists today, these are some of the things you see in the bullets that the AI and machine learning can do. It can flag the contact, it can correlate the information, and it can show a great deal of information. So this is some of the low-hanging fruit that we feel we can use right now today to assist in that ISR mission. In the same way, the communications mission, you all know that the electronic environment is very busy and you can't just willy-nilly send things back. So what the AI and machine learning can do is check the electronic environment, prioritize the data transmission paths, make sure the transmission isn't hacked, etc. And then on the flagship, we've had tactical decision aids in most of our navies for decades that have been very rudimentary. Again, AI and machine learning will not make the decision for the commander, but it will assist the commander, particularly in the fast-paced battle space we live in now, to make the right decision. And again, Captain Sater mentioned lethal autonomous systems. The bar is much higher for those. We have to make sure that the right target is targeted by the platform. And again, if you think of how this plays out in the U.S. context, it's someone sitting in a windowless room in Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, driving either a Predator or Reaper, and someone in the National Military Command Center or even the White House Situation Room is saying, how sure are you that that's the person you should shoot at? So again, AI and machine learning can up that certainty or say it's not the target. Again, very simple to do with the algorithms we have today. We just need to insert them in our weapon systems. So that's one operational use case, but I wanted to turn to one that is seriously the biggest issue in our Navy today from a technological standpoint. It's better decision making. And again, General Shanahan, first director of the JAIC, this was his definition of what AI can do for all of U.S. defense, and I would gather for all of our defense agencies. Those of you in the U.S. would likely recognize this as Colonel John Boyd. He got very famous for something called the OODA loop, which he came up with during the Korean War due to battles between Soviet MiGs and US F-86. And you see at the top there, it says observe, orient, decide, and act. And his theory was that if you could get inside the enemy's OODA loop, if you could observe, orient, decide, and act faster, then you would win. Well, from the US Navy perspective, we have been chasing all four aspects of the OODA loop for a long, long time. And several years ago, our Chief of Naval Operations at remarks at the Current Strategy Forum at SAM's parent organization, the Naval War College, said this. He said, you know, we've gotten really good at the observe part. We have great platforms like Triton and others that can see things, and we've gotten really good at the act part because we can pull the trigger, but we're not doing so well in the orient and decide part. And it's not because people are stupid or lazy. It's because the technologies to do those things well did not exist as recently as a few years ago. Today they do with big data, AI, and machine learning, and they're leading this shift in the way we look at things. Well, decision-making impacts all aspects of what our warfighters must contend with. And I'd like to turn to popular fiction for a moment to describe this. Some of you of a certain age may remember this movie. It's okay if you don't, because it was made in 1965. And this depicted the challenges of making decisions under stress. And if you don't recall the movie, it was very reminiscent of what was actually going on in the Cold War with the US and the Soviets playing hide and seek with the destroyers and submarines. And in this movie, the USS Bedford has been tracking a Soviet diesel submarine for several days. The tension keeps rising. The captain even runs over the submarine's snorkel. And when someone asked the captain if he's going to take the first shot against the submarine, he says, no, but if he fires one, I'll fire one. And a tired ensign mistakes that as the captain's order to fire one. He fires an ASROC rocket at the submarine, which destroys it, but not before the submarine launches a nuclear torpedo and destroys the ship. Well, that's fiction, but it was eerily prescient of something that happened 55 years later. Here you see the tragic aftermath of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard shooting down a Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. So this was, again, a case where the commander didn't have the complete picture. He couldn't get through to higher authority. He had every reason to believe that the US was going to launch missiles at Iran. And tragically, he shot his missile and all 176 passengers died. Well, it'd be easy to say from a US perspective, well, that's fiction, or that's a country that's not as technologically advanced as we are. But we have a ways to go in our military regarding decisions. If we had more time, I'd go through each of these in detail, but I think most of you, as an informed audience, know about them, about USS Stark eating 2 Exocet missiles in the Gulf, about USS Vincennes just 1 year later, shooting down Iranian Airbus, and 290 people died. And even more contemporaneously at the bottom with Fitzgerald and McCain and the tragic collision. So I'm not saying that the ability to have decision aids and ways to make better decisions were the only causes of these tragedies, but they played a huge part. So that really brings us to how do we ensure that our warfighters can outthink our adversaries? Because as I introduced at the beginning, our alternate title, Ships, Planes, Tanks, and Algorithms, what will we need to prevail in the coming conflict? Paul Scari, who wrote just a wonderful book, Army of None, about robots and warfare, he harkened back to that man-machine teaming that I teed up earlier, showing that that is really the way that we will win, with men and machines, not either or. So I think MSCC is really a good organization, a great organization, actually, to help lead the effort to thoughtfully leverage big data, AI, and machine learning in our weapon systems. And, you know, there are important corporate training, maintenance, and other challenges that can benefit from that. Where Sam and I are coming from as 2 former operators is that we should use it first to help address operational challenges, which are not only real, but very pressing today. And our Jake director suggests not swinging for the fences, but going after the low-hanging fruit. Every one of those examples I used with the Triton aircraft is something that we can bite off piece parts of that today. And, you know, we think now is the time to do this, not waiting till all the issues with these technologies are sorted out. And I think this forum can provide a stewardship to help further the dialogue for this effort. And again, just briefly, our command, without being the public affairs officer waving the flag for it, we have enormous equities in unmanned systems and these technologies. Just very briefly, we've been working on unmanned ground, air, surface, and subsurface systems for a long time. This is just one idea of how many people in our command are devoted to unmanned systems, let alone the AI and machine learning algorithms that support them. And again, our motto is we don't build these systems themselves, we put the brains in them. So, you know, it's easy to say, well, let's just jump right in and do this AI machine learning. I hasten to add that it's not that easy. And as you see at the top there at the graphic, between 66 and 97, we had 30 years of an AI winter when people had overpromised and under-delivered with AI to the extent that AI development was all but abandoned. Well, things took off again in the 90s, but again, it wasn't a perfect rise. If you look at that second picture on the bottom, the second picture from the right, that's Tay, and that's Microsoft's chatbot that Microsoft rolled out with great fanfare and thought would be very useful to people. Unfortunately, Tay generated scandalous and very disgusting things on the internet, and Microsoft pulled that after 16 hours. So again, the point is this has to be done thoughtfully in the civilian world, but it has to be done super thoughtfully in the military sphere. So really just to further the dialogue, When the U.S. Navy put nuclear power to sea with the USS Nautilus in 1954, that was only 9 years after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And people were catatonic that if we put nuclear reactors under the ocean, it would be catastrophic. But so we had a very high burden of proof. And it's the same way with AI. As someone in the technical world now, we cannot engineer out all potential ethical issues when inserting these technologies into our military systems. We feel of all the uses of AI and machine learning in the military sphere, the ability to make better decisions faster with fewer people and fewer mistakes is the key to a success. Not a trivial challenge. And as we work as military people, industry people, academic people, I think we have a mandate to make sure we do this the right way. And I think having an ongoing conversation about this is a way to proceed. And again, talking about popular culture, again, if you think about when soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines will actually use AI and machine learning, they will use it when they can trust it. And again, J.K. Rowling teed it up in her book that if you can't see its brain, you're probably not going to use it. In the US, after we have something on a public broadcasting system, it's popular to say, well, if you like this show, you can read more about it here. I just wanted to tee up a book Sam and I recently did. This is an anthology, and we brought in people such as Admiral Swift, such as the Honorable Bob Work, really to foster a dialogue on AI at war and how we can thoughtfully do this. It won't be our last book on the subject. It will get in the way of future articles. So tune in for more downstream as far as this subject. And with that, I think I've left enough time for a robust number of questions, and I look forward to taking them.
Hey, George, thank you so much for a outstanding presentation. You've given us a lot to think about. You've also validated that all those war movies that I've watched at military college were not all in waste, instead of studying for those exams. But you've packed a lot of information in a very short period of time. And obviously it resonates with our audience, and we've already started receiving some really good questions. So I'm going to start with the first one. Your comments were very interesting for a global Navy like the US Navy, but how can smaller navies optimize their investments in AI and autonomous systems?
No, that's a great question. And yeah, I am coming at from a US Navy perspective, but I think the point for smaller navies is that it's kind of like making a CD. Once you make a CD, you can make 1,000 CDs fairly cheaply. So once the algorithms are written, let's use the Triton as an example. And I'm mindful of the Australian Navy, for example, is purchasing the Triton. Once you write the algorithm for the Triton to query the automatic identification system, the AIS, to tell what ship it is when the Triton picks up that dot in the ocean, then that's written. And if the US purchases it and Australia purchases it and Canada can purchase it. So again, it's not like building an aircraft carrier or J-35. The algorithms are fairly inexpensive. And just a plug for the kind of work, Captain, that I know you're aware of that goes on with the TTCP, the Technical Cooperation Program, where the Five Eyes nations pool their R&D resources to come up with a better military system. That's a prime example of something that can be co-developed, sharing costs, and it's cheaper for everyone.
That's great. Thank you, George, for the answer. And it gives us a lot of threads to pull on here. One of them that you're pointing to is interoperability. It's always been very important from all the, any deployment that I've been on, that interoperability piece with our allied navies. Now, in terms of, the biggest bang for the buck in terms of investments, because we know AI really runs on data. So, perhaps maybe just a little bit of insights on, do you invest more in initially curating your data and organizing it, or do you make your investments in terms of capability and hardware?
So Captain, I think you've read our book on the sly, because we we really point to the first, that where we struggle the most is in having data that is organized and curated and that can be mined, because without the data, the AI and machine learning algorithms are really useless. So most of the work in our military right now is going into corralling the data. That's quite frankly one of the reasons that the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center was stood up, because AI spans all of our services, and it's a way to prevent the Navy from coming up with one data set and the Army coming up with another. So to answer your question directly, it's corralling the data and having the data be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. The data is always fundamental in all of this. I'll go to another question. Can you comment on the benefits of using AI to combat non-traditional threats, such as drug trafficking in the Caribbean?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it goes to how you can put AI into the right platforms. For example, and I've done drug ops in the Caribbean, counter drug ops twice when I was in command of USS Cleveland, and I know what a challenging mission it is. So, and again, I'm a little bit of an advocate for AI. So you can search the Caribbean with a maritime patrol aircraft such as the P-8, which does a lot of fabulous things. ISR is one of them. Or you can have a Triton unmanned aircraft leveraging AI and machine learning to do those things autonomously and automatically 24/7 with no crew rest, and doing it cheaper and more effectively. And if you don't mind, I'd like to come back to your previous question just a little bit. Here is the challenge with the data. As all of you know, anyone who's bought anything online, our tech companies collect an enormous amount of data on us. And there's reasons they collect that data, because they can make a profit. And the data that they use comes in the form of electronic waste, if you'll call it that. When we purchase something, when we look at a book online, well, the DoD doesn't have electronic waste. Every bit of data we have, we go out and collect. So the challenge is A, to collect the data, and then B is to curate it and make it useful. So it's not a trivial effort at all.
Thank you for that answer, George. I also remember some of my deployments on Op Carib, where it becomes a bit of a numbers game. And I think that's where the AI enhances our capabilities to be present at all time, as opposed to the finite resources that we could have on station. Maybe we'll shift to just a little bit towards another area that AI could be really critical in. The question is, what roles will virtual reality play in training? How will AI assist more mundane tasks such as maintenance and logistics? Someone must have known that this was an area of interest for me.
Well, I can tell you right now in the U.S. military, and I mentioned that the JAIC director felt that we should focus on operational. We focus on that too, but we are addressing a lot of those back office issues simply because industry has used big data, AI, and machine learning to solve problems within industry. So the best practices to do that exist for the military. If you look at it from the military's risk reward, someone can say to them, we can bring in AI and machine learning to solve this maintenance, logistics, something you would call not unkindly a back office issue, because it's been done before. Now, if you want us to do something with the Triton, that's a little different. We haven't done that before. So I think it's happening in our military. I know, for example, under the stewardship of our Defense Innovation Unit up in Silicon Valley, which for those of you not familiar with it, is realizing in the US that we needed not only the big defense companies like General Dynamics and others to build our weapon systems of the future, we needed the smaller tech companies. So Defense Innovation Unit was set up in Silicon Valley to integrate with our high tech companies from a proximity standpoint. One of the projects first projects they took on was in the CENTCOM area of responsibilities with basically aircraft scheduling, refueling, scheduling of various aircraft sorties, and they have the data to support that they made it more efficient, more effective, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where a lot of this is happening now. We're just suggesting that it's time to bring this to the operational field, particularly in decision-making, which still needs a great deal of help.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many applications, myriad of applications to where AI can add value. I am just thinking to your point in terms of the back office, you know, that the supply chain ends up becoming one of those competitive advantages. And if you can have systems or machine learn and order their own replacement parts, you know, based on reliability data, you could solve a lot of issues in terms of having systems availability to the commanders. The next question, I guess, pertains to this ability to build trust, which was very important when you spoke about it, because ultimately, whenever we speak about data analytics or data in general, or the ability to want to rely on that data, trust is a big deal, whether it's trust in the systems or trust in the information we're getting. And so the next question that came in relates to this. It says, can you comment further on building effective trust with the human operators alongside AI and autonomous systems? I take it we need to build the infrastructure, whether it's policies or, you know, what are those rules for decision making when we're interacting, teaming with the machines. Perhaps we can get some insights on that, George.
No, thank you for that. Earlier this year, I listened in on a webinar where a Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Berger, spoke, and he talked about the conference was about national security and AI. And he talked about how AI is being introduced in the Marine Corps. And he said the way they tried this out is they had a simple decision-making tool, and they gave it to one platoon of junior Marines, and they said, this is what this does, and it'll do all these things great, and here you go. And they gave a similar tool to another group of the Marines, and they said, this is what this can do. It's your job to train it, and then you can use it. And General Berger said, well, guess which group of Marines actually used the decision aid? And it was the second one, because they had trained it, and therefore they trusted it. And again, this is a big deal in our Department of Defense. Our DARPA, our Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has a program called Explainable AI. And it really goes back to that quote I used from J.K. Rowling. It's that you have to be able to see what the AI brain is doing in order to trust it. If the commander has to say, where's that autonomous system going and what's it doing and when is it coming back, he or she's not going to use it. So trust is essential, and it has to be gained organically. It can't be pushed down from above.
Thank you, George. Just to pull on that a little bit further in terms of building competencies, you know, in the Royal Canadian Navy, the Admiralty has recently promulgated the Digital Navy strategy. And as commanders seek to implement it, we're finding out that we have some gaps in terms of what you might call digital competencies or digital literacy period. And so, you know, many of us have been exposed to a number of webinars on AI or digitization. But, you know, in order to move from awareness to action, you really need to build some of those competencies. And the next question that came in from the audience refers to that. It says, how should military education adapt to effectively absorb and integrate these technologies?
Okay, no, thanks for that question. So going back to the book Sam and I did, we very purposely invited two professors from the U.S. Naval Academy Computer Science Department to write a chapter, and they talked about just this education. I think walking it back further, we have a term we use in the US, and I suspect you use it in Canada too, called STEM. science and technology, engineering and mathematics. And it really is trying to grow digital natives from preschool up. Some of this, for those of you that have children, is happening organically. My 5-year-old grandson can probably operate my iPad better than I can. But then, you know, when it gets to actually coding and doing those sorts of things, you know, I think I'm relentlessly optimistic that is happening in most of our educational systems. Where it comes to a trade-off, I think, is with our military professionals, those who attend service academies, those who do training along the way. How much can you cram into a training pipeline? Not too many years ago, within the US Navy in particular, we decided everyone needed to be well-versed in cyber, and cyber courses proliferated at all levels, graduate school, war colleges. And now we're seeing the same kind of trend in AI and machine learning, simply so people in positions of authority can understand the technology and have a dialogue and be confident in using it.
Yeah, I know you're absolutely right. There's no way escaping it. We need to get smarter about this business. And often, as you mentioned, I learned from my 13-year-old playing Fortnite. It's impressive the amount of AI that potentially is embedded into those video games. The next question we have is, can you comment on quantum computing and how and when they will enhance the systems you mentioned?
Yeah, quantum computing, quite frankly, isn't an area of my expertise. I follow it. I know some groundbreaking work is going into it. And where we see quantum computing helping the most is, going back to your question several minutes earlier, is about the data. I mean, how do you corral all of the data and make sense of it and curate it? So computers have become more powerful. We've done better at that, but most people look ahead to when quantum computing is more ubiquitous, that we'll be able to really make great strides in inserting AI and machine learning into our military systems.
Okay, thank you, George. Yeah, I guess it will become all interconnected, and you know, part of it is continue to integrate all those emerging technologies as well. The next question actually refers to a book, and I think it's an interesting one. Can you comment on AI futures predicted in Admiral Stavridis' future fiction book, 2034?
So first, full disclosure, Admiral Stavridis is one of my closest and dearest friends. We deployed together in 1998 in Abraham Lincoln Strike Group. He was the Desron commander, and he is, I hope he's not listening, because I'm not saying this to make him blush. He's not only the smartest naval officer I've ever met, he's the smartest person I've ever met. But I've read his book. It's fantastic. And I think it is very predictive of what future warfare will be like. Having said that, I've read other books that are fictionalized accounts of the future of warfare, where AI and machine learning are introduced. And I have to say, in every single one of those, the AI always acted perfectly. Nothing ever broke down. And so I think we have to be realistic about what AI and machine learning can actually do in future warfighting scenarios. It's not a panacea for everything. It's something, again, that man-machine teaming, it's something where the machine assists the man or woman in making decisions. And that's exactly how our lab is focused at that. We have a future warfare scenario fairly close to Admiral Stavridis. It's called Conflict 2037. And in that scenario, the AI actually becomes a part of the staff. It doesn't just give you rote answers to questions. It listens in on the staff speaking. And when it thinks it can help, the AI chimes in. So that's our futuristic look, but we've got a long way to go to get there.
That's great. Thank you, George. You know, I'm trying to cram as many questions as possible, because obviously there's a lot of interest, which is not surprising given the topic and the depth of your knowledge. And I know you've touched on those wave tops, but you're really being gracious with giving us a paper that you've actually written for this webinar that answers a lot more in detail as well on some of those key specific questions. I'll get this question here. Can you comment on the optimal level of human interaction with AI analysis, particularly in the maritime domain?
Well, I think, it goes back to human-machine teaming. It's let's use that Triton as an example. The Triton doesn't go out on a 15-hour mission and then just come back and report. It's interacting with the human the entire time. So again, to use that ISR example, the Triton is flying across the ocean, which is empty most of the time. It discovers a contact and it reports to the operator, well, I have a contact here. And then the operator says, well, tell me more. And the Triton says, well, it's either in a normal shipping lane or it's gone off in some non-predictable direction. And then the operator says, well, what's it squawking? What's its AIS? And the Triton says, and then the operator says, well, what's its port of origin? Give me the crew manifest. It keeps querying it this way. So it is an iterative process, again, where the Triton doesn't go do its thing and come back 15 hours later, but sets up a dialogue with the operator who queries the AI continuously.
Great, thank you, George. You've been very gracious with your time. I think the next question might be the last one, and it pertains to the heart of the matter, in which it really resonated, the picture where you put the commander with the robot soldier, and I think a lot of it, in order to build that trust, there is a certain level of culture change that needs to happen to get the buy-in and embrace that the effectiveness of the teaming. What would you recommend for naval services? I know we're in the Royal Canadian Navy trying to implement additional AI. One of them is having a bridge bosun mate sort of act like a Siri or Alexa and bring the ships to flying stations or action stations. But a lot of it also depends on sailors really buying into the technologies and adapting to them. What would you recommend in terms of that culture change piece?
Yeah, well, going back to that example with our Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Berger, is rather than giving sailors a box and saying this box is going to do magical and wondrous things, give them a box that they have to train. We worked on a project at our lab years ago with DARPA called PAL, Personal Assistant, where it was just that type of thing, where you mentioned Siri or Alexa, you trained your office assistant to do the things you want to do. And then again, I think as General Shanahan said, is go after the low-hanging fruit. Don't go swing for the fences, bring a little bit of AI into the system, let sailors try it out. And our guess is they're going to say, we want more, have it do something else, and then build that incrementally, not have a 10-year development program where we've delivered this wondrous thing that does everything for everybody. So, incremental steps, have sailors try it out, and then we think they'll likely want more.
Thank you for that advice, George. I'll definitely take that in implementation of Digital Navy here at the base. And you're absolutely right, incremental changes, and sometimes you have to fail fast and adapt to what works. You've been, again, very gracious and generous with your outstanding insights. I will provide some closing remarks in saying that, really what resonated here is the ability for this new technology to enhance the commander's situational awareness. It really can act as a force multiplier if used under the right circumstances. And we have both the regulatory framework and the capability-based approach to support it. One of the things that I read from your articles that really resonated is you wrote the ability to outthink an adversary will spell the difference between victory and defeat. And you have certainly given us a lot to think about here today. So thank you very much, sir. It's been truly an honor being on the same platform with you. And thank you again for the amazing insights you've given us here.
Thank you all for having me.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Captains Galdorisi and Sater. That was a fantastic conversation. Unfortunately, we only allocated an hour of time, but I'm sure we could go on for many hours further and even days. And hopefully, George, we can get you back in person for the next in-person Maritime Security Challenges conference and continue that conversation then. As both Captain Sater and Captain Galdorisi noted, George has written a fantastic paper on all this, which we will make available on the Maritime Security Challenges website. We're just undergoing a quick website refresh, but that will be available within the next few days. As well, a video of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel. If you just search for MSC, that's Mike Sierra Charlie Conference, all one word, in the search bar, you should be able to find us. Thanks again to our partners in making this happen, the Navy League of Canada and the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, and of course the invaluable support from Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, the Canadian Defense Review, Vanguard, and Esprit de Corps. I'd like to note that we have another a webinar in the offing coming up in mid-June. So I'm absolutely delighted to say that Dr. Tabitha Mallory of the University of Washington and the founder and CEO of the China Ocean Institute is going to come on and tell us all about Chinese deep fishing activities off of South America. So that's a session I'm particularly pleased to announce for our Latin American friends who have been so kind to join us in these webinars. So I hope that you will all join us again for the next Maritime Security Challenges virtual session in mid-June. Please look for email and Twitter announcements to that. So that's all we have for you this afternoon, evening, morning, however, whenever you've joined us. And fair winds and following seas to you all.
At Lockheed Martin, we're on a mission. Your mission. When millions of people are counting on you, you can count on us. To build the impossible, to invent the inconceivable, and solve every problem with speed and reliability. Every mission is an expedition of the greatest importance, both to you and to us.